Hello, hello to all. I hope that everyone is having a good weekend so far. I just walked in the door and I was going to share this with you before, and I was actually going to do like a screen share type thing so that I could kind of walk you through a graphic that I have. But I'm just going to read this because I couldn't read through everything that I wanted to read through regarding this topic in the amount of time that I had in that video. So I am actually going to share a chapter of the book that I'm working on, Daniel 70 Weeks, with you guys and talk about the midpoint of the week. This is actually the last chapter that I have written. And no, it's not. It's chapter 9, in the midst of the week. And that's a lie because I actually did write chapter 10, which is called The Return of the King. So now all I have to actually write about are the ways in which the final three purposes for the 70 weeks were accomplished. And that is to bring in everlasting righteousness, which fortunately, in the previous video that I did talking about the whole imminency conversation, I actually touched on this when talking about Acts 1 and the disciples asking Jesus, will thou at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? And he said, no. In fact, that he wasn't going to do it in their natural lifetimes. When's he going to do it? Well, that is the fourth purpose for the 70 weeks. 70 weeks to determine upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, and make reconciliation for iniquity. Those are done. They were done on the cross. To bring in everlasting righteousness. Wilt thou at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? No, but there is a point in the future that he will do it, that he's going to restore the kingdom to Israel. And that is the bringing in of everlasting righteousness. That is the beginning of the reign of Christ on earth and essentially the beginning of his reign for eternity. Daniel 2 talks about that, and Daniel 7 talks about that, the establishment of an everlasting kingdom. So that's the fourth purpose of the six, and then to seal up the vision and prophecy. And what's interesting is I have always thought of this in a broad context of the summation of all prophecies will be at the revelation of Jesus Christ. And on a broad scope, that's true, but the vision and prophecy is actually a specific reference to Daniel's vision of the 70 weeks and his prophecy. That 70 weeks are determined to do all of these things, which are to bring his prophecy to a conclusion, which ultimately does lead up to and include the revelation of Jesus Christ at the second coming, and then to anoint the most holy, and that is found in Ezekiel 40, verse 3. So I have those three chapters to go through. I think they'll be relatively short because there isn't a whole lot of explanation that actually needs to go into those. They're pretty much self-explanatory. There was a lot of explanation that went into the first three. The last four, not so much, because they're all over the Bible. But the first three were revealed in the New Testament. They were not explained in the Old Testament as to how they would find fulfillment. They were just given as purposes that would be accomplished through the 70 weeks prophecy. And we find how they were fulfilled in the New Testament, like to finish the transgression. It is finished. How was that? What was that? So there was a lot of explanation for the first three as far as what Christ did, how he did it. The last three are pretty self-explanatory, and they're all over the Old and New Testament. So I still have those, but I just finished writing The Return of the King, and that is obviously Daniel 9:27c, which is until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. So I am actually technically done with Daniel 9:1 through 27, and I just have to talk about the ways in which the final three purposes find fulfillment through or are facilitated by the 70 weeks prophecy, the vision and prophecy. But I did want to share something that I think is interesting. This whole conversation about the abomination of desolation and the midpoint of the week. Why is this interesting? Because when you look at this from a logical viewpoint, we know the book of Revelation that it's going to be tied to, hopefully it'll be tied to the events of the seventh trumpet. Midpoint of the week, Daniel says that it's going to happen in the midst of the week. He shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate. So there's this point A, which is he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. Okay, and then 1,260 days later, or time times half a time, or 42 months, midpoint of the week, in conjunction or following on the heels of the sounding of the seventh trumpet, there's this event that occurs. What causes it to occur? I mean, when you think about it from a logical perspective, what happens to make it occur at this time? Because you can't really think that the Antichrist is sitting there with a calendar checking off the days. Oh, it's day 1260 now. It's time for me to do this. So I better march into the temple and do this. Probably not going to happen that way. So what is it that facilitates this or causes this abomination of desolation to mark or to occur at the midpoint of the week? Now think about this in perspective of the one who comes in the place of Christ. How did Christ come the first time? He was humble, he was meek, and he was lowly. His triumphal entry was, according to Zechariah 9, the prophecy said he was meek and lowly, riding the foal of a donkey. Okay, so what's the antithesis of that? Someone who's haughty, someone who's arrogant, someone who's filled with pride. So when you look at what the abomination of desolation is, in contrast to how Jesus presented himself, what is the abomination of desolation? How specifically is it described? Who exalteth himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself, pretending to be, showing himself that he is God. So what causes that? When you have this person who comes in the place of, that means mimics. When you look at Revelation 6, he's the rider on the white horse, just like Jesus, who's the true King of Kings, Lord of Lords, is the rider on the white horse in Revelation 19. This guy comes 7 years beforehand. He has a crown. Okay, well, Jesus on his head had many crowns, many diadems, which speak of his position, his royal birthright. This guy is given his crown, and it's not a diadem. It's not a rightful position. It's not positional power. It's Stephanos. It's overcomer. And he's given a crown. He has a bow. Sorry, he has a bow and he's given a crown. The bow is representative of a covenant. Okay, well, it's not the new covenant because that imagery is depicted in Revelation 4 via the rainbow round about the throne in sight like unto an emerald. Emerald, because emerald in the Old Testament, the imagery goes back to the Old Testament. The fourth stone in the breastplate that the high priest wore is the emerald. The stones representing the 12 tribes. The fourth son to whom the emerald relates is the tribe of Judah. So the rainbow, symbol of a new covenant, mediated by the high priest from the tribe of Judah, which is why it's in sight like unto an emerald. So we're introduced to the new covenant and the mediator who is Christ in Revelation 4. Different from the imagery of the bow in Revelation 6. That's the Daniel 9:27 covenant, to say that this guy who comes in the place of Christ, which is what John 5:43 says, I am come in my Father's name, you receive me not. Another shall come in his own name, him you will receive. So they're going to receive this guy. He comes with a covenant that is not the new covenant, it's the old covenant. Daniel 9:27 covenant to begin the week. He's given a crown, meaning he's given his place. Israel accepts him. So they give him an overcomer's crown, a Stephanos, not a diadem. Jesus has diadems on his head because it's a positional, rightful authority. King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And then he sets forth conquering and to conquer. Jesus, when he comes back, comes to judge and make war. So you're looking at this guy who at the beginning of the week, to start the week, he's mimicking. And in the midst of the week, he departs from that mimicry to declare himself to be above everything that the Jews worship. He's not meek and lowly and humble and their Messiah type. He is, what is he? He's the antithesis of that. He declares himself to be better, all of that. So what's the change? What happens at the midpoint of the week to cause this change? To move from a state of mimicking to get them to believe him to be something he's not, someone he's not, to depart from that, to declare himself to be above all of that. And obviously that's going to break commandment 1, thou shalt have no other gods before me. So if this guy is declaring himself to be above all that is called God, then clearly that's a departure from the law. And that's a departure from everything that they know, which is why they're going to be in such a mental tailspin and running to and fro, trying to figure out what's going on during the second half of the week after they flee from this guy who just proved himself to not be who they thought he was. So when we look at the midpoint of the week, the Abomination of Desolation, this isn't some guy that's just sitting there checking off calendar days thinking, oh, it's time now, so let's go do this. There's something that occurs to make this shift. And what is that? And that is the content of chapter 9, or what I discuss in chapter 9 in the midst of the week. Because Daniel says point A starts it, point B is the midpoint, point C is the end point. But point B is not just an isolated event unto itself. There are a whole bunch of things that Revelation tells us happen in the middle of the week. And there's something that happens before the Abomination of Desolation. There's something that happens before the flight of the remnant. And it's documented in the book of Matthew and in the book of Revelation also. So chapter 9 in the midst of the week. And this is just an interesting thing to me, because from a logical viewpoint, when you think, okay, there's something that's got to happen to make this other thing happen that Daniel says is going to happen at the midpoint. So what is that other thing that Revelation tells us about happens first? I said in chapter 8, one of the ways that I ended that chapter is people will never learn the correct way if they're allowed to continue doing the wrong thing indefinitely and without consequence. On the flip side, God could just decide to judge every unrighteous person without giving them 7 extra years to see the errors of their ways. But he is a God of grace. Learning, however, will not be painless. God will judge Israel for returning to a system he put an end to and rejecting his final sacrifice for sins. What does God do to assist Israel in her learning process? He allows events to occur which will make their bad behavior stop. So he allows the events of the midpoint of the week to occur because if they were not brought to an end, Israel would continue indefinitely in her old covenant relationships, which cannot save her. There would never be a leading from old covenant to new covenant. You got to change that paradigm. You have to allow events to occur that will make that paradigm shift. If Israel was allowed to continue her flawed thinking and adherence to something God finished long ago, she would never see the need for a new covenant relationship with him through Christ. Thus, God put into place a sequence of events which will have Israel running for her life, away from her false Messiah and to her true God, even if not yet to his Christ. What does this sequence of events begin with? Well, when discussing Revelation 11's temple references in the previous chapter, I noted that the 7th trumpet is the midpoint of the 70th week. Daniel ties the cessation of sacrifices and offerings to the midpoint of the week. But Daniel does not say God causes the sacrifice and offerings to cease. He says the Antichrist causes that. The trumpet judgments are initiated by Jesus the Son, to whom all judgment has been committed. So understanding that the Antichrist is not going to just arbitrarily decide to take away Israel's ability to keep her law, we must seek to find out what leads him to that course of action. Of the several things which are tied to the midpoint of the week via Daniel, Matthew, and Revelation, which do we see first? Revelation 10:7. But in the days of the voice of the 7th angel, when he shall begin to sound, the mystery of God should be finished, as he hath declared to his servants, the prophets. The first introduction we are given to things which will happen at the midpoint of the week is the finishing of the mystery of God. Now, mysteries are finished when they're revealed, making them no longer mysteries. What is this mystery of God, which Revelation tells us will be revealed at the midpoint of the week when the 7th angel shall begin to sound? 1 Timothy 3:16, without controversy, great is the mystery of godliness. God was manifest in the flesh, justified in the spirit, seen of angels, preached unto the Gentiles, believed on in the world, received up into glory. The finishing of the mystery of God is the worldwide preaching of the gospel. We see the same references in Matthew 24 and Revelation 12 and 14 to give us further details of this revelation. And this is where I bring in a graphic that I actually do not have to visually present. It is on academia.edu. It's the Revelation 12 sign, revelation of the mystery of God. But basically, this is a point by point. 1 Timothy 3:16. Next to, and then each point of that next to Revelation 10:7, Revelation 12:1 through 5, and Matthew 24:14, and Revelation 14:6 and 7. These are all components that tell us that there will be an audio and a visual representation of the finishing of the mystery of God in conjunction with the seventh trumpet. So it says, without controversy, great is the mystery of godliness, which is previewed in Revelation 10:7, but in the days of the voice of the seventh angel, when he shall begin to sound, the mystery of God should be finished, as he hath declared to his servants the prophets. So what is the mystery of God, which will be finished at the seventh trumpet? God was manifest in the flesh, justified in the spirit. There appeared a great wonder in heaven, called a great wonder because great is the mystery of godliness. So there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, upon her head a crown of 12 stars, and she, being with child, cried, travailing in pain, travailing in birth and pain to be delivered. She brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. So the bringing forth of the child, the birth of the child, is God was manifest in the flesh, justified in the spirit. Next, seen of angels. And that's what Revelation 12 next tells us. There appeared another wonder in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon, which is an angel, Satan, having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his head. His tail drew a third part of the stars, or angels, who fell with him, and did cast them to earth. The dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered to devour her child as soon as it was born. So we go back to the points of the mystery of godliness. The fourth and fifth are preached unto the Gentiles, believed on in the world. This is Matthew 24:14 and Revelation 14:6 and 7. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world, Gentiles, for a witness to all nations, Gentiles, and then the end shall come. And I saw another angel fly through the midst of the heaven, having the everlasting gospel, preached unto the Gentiles, believed on in the world, having the everlasting gospel, to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation and kindred and tongue and people, Gentiles, saying with a loud voice, fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come. Worship him that made heaven, the earth, the sea, and the fountains of waters. And the final point of the mystery of godliness per 1 Timothy 3:16 is received up into glory. And Revelation 12 sign ends with, and her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. Why to his throne? Because in Revelation 11, the kingdoms of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. Thou hast taken to thee that great power and hast begun to reign. Kings reign from thrones. So the child was caught up unto God and to his throne. Seventh trumpet. Of note is what the angel that flies through the midst of the heaven, having the everlasting gospel, preaches. What language does he use to reveal the mystery? Revelation 14:6 and 7. I saw another angel fly through the midst of the heaven, having the everlasting gospel, to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation and kindred and tongue and people, saying with a loud voice, fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come, and worship him that made heaven and the earth and the sea and the fountains of waters. Let's fear God and give glory to him, and worship him who created everything. Those are the instructions that the angel gives. Why does that matter? Because the abomination of desolation occurs on the heels of the angel's revelation. How do we know this? Because of what Jesus next says in Matthew 24. Recall that the preaching of the worldwide gospel is Matthew 24:14. Directly after he prophesies of the preaching of the gospel worldwide, he tells the Jews to flee. Why? Next verse is Matthew 24:15 through 22. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house. Neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. And woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. But pray ye that your flight not be in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no nor shall ever be. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved, but for the elect's sake those days shall be shortened. Jesus does not tell the Jew, he does not just tell the Jews to flee. He tells them to flee immediately. No time to stop and think. Leave. Michael and his angels are warring against the dragon and his angels and confining them to earth to wreak havoc for the second half of the 70th week. We learn this in Revelation 12, 7 through 17. There was a war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon fought and his angels and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. The great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now is come salvation and strength, the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ. That's tied to trumpet 7 also. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto death. Therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. And this is the reference to the third woe, which we heard at the end of Revelation 3. The 5th, 6th, and 7th trumpet judgments were woes. This is the 7th trumpet judgment presented as the woe. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. When the dragon saw that he was cast unto the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place where she is nourished, for a time, times, and half a time from the face of the serpent. The serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast. How do we know those events are mid-trib? Because the woman will be in the wilderness post-flight out of Jerusalem for a time, times, and half a time. That is 3.5 years. However, that is the second such reference in the chapter. The first was given directly on the heels of the Revelation 12 sign, which depicts the trumpet 7 revelation of the mystery of God. This is Revelation 12:6. The woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. So Revelation 12:1 through 5, which is that whole sign, equals Matthew 24:14, the revelation of the mystery of God, the preaching of the gospel worldwide. Revelation 12:6 is Matthew 24:15 through 22, the flight of the remnant, which they flee after they see the abomination of desolation. So you have the preaching of the gospel, and then the flight of the remnant. What about the abomination of desolation that happens between those two things? Well, furthermore, the Jews need to flee because the Antichrist is given power over all nations and kindreds and tongues for the remainder of the 70th week. If the Jews do not leave, they will be killed. It is within these verses in Revelation we find the direct link to the abomination of desolation Daniel prophesied would occur in the midst of the week. It is this overspreading of abominations which causes the Jews to flee in the previous chapter, Revelation 12. I'm going to clarify that. It is this overspreading of abominations that Jesus gave warning about in Matthew 24. What is the abomination of desolation? Revelation 13:4 through 7. They worship they worship the dragon, which gave power unto the beast, and they worship the beast, saying, who is like unto the beast, who is able to make war with him. There was given him a mouth, speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. He opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and them that dwell in heaven. That is the abomination of desolation. It was given unto him to make war with the saints, to overcome them, and power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. Jesus said it would happen. Revelation shows it happening. Paul and Daniel give detail about what it will sound like and what it will look like. In 2 Thessalonians 2, Paul refers directly to Daniel's prophecy of the 2 things which will happen in the midst of the week: the cessation of sacrifices and offerings, and the revelation of the man of sin, aka the son of perdition, aka the beast, aka the Antichrist. 2 Thessalonians 2, 3, and 4, let no man deceive you by any means, for that day, second coming, shall not come, except there come the falling away first, cessation of sacrifice and offerings, and the man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, abomination of desolation. who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Daniel describes it the same way in Daniel 11:36. The king shall do according to his will. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished, for that is determined shall be done. Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any god, for he shall magnify himself above all. But in his estate he shall honor the God of forces, and a God whom his fathers knew not shall he honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and pleasant things. Thus shall he do in the most strongholds with a strange God whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory. He shall cause them to rule over many and shall divide the land for gain. And this is how God brings about Israel's learning. His angel preaches the everlasting gospel, telling people to fear him and worship his son who created all things. What does the Antichrist then do? He goes straight into the temple where the Jews honor that very God, but not his son, and sits in the place where God would sit and declares himself to be above all that is called God or that is worshipped, imagining himself to be greater than God. The cessation of sacrifices and offerings and the overspreading of abominations is reactionary on the part of the Antichrist. It is a response to the seventh trumpet. Being the gracious God we know him to be, even in the midst of judgment, he will recall their attention to the command to flee and even take them to the wilderness himself. There, for the second half of the week, he will nourish them, protect them, and teach them. Remember, they're blinded. This is the point at which the many will run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. For 3.5 years, they will seek and try to learn. God will proceed to do a marvelous work. Isaiah 29:10-14. For the Lord hath poured out upon you the spirit of deep sleep, and hath closed your eyes. The prophets and your rulers, the seers, hath he covered. And the vision of all has become unto you as the words of a book that is sealed, which men deliver to one that is learned, saying, read this, I pray thee. And he saith, I cannot, for it is sealed. And the book is delivered to him that is not learned, saying, read this, I pray thee. And he saith, I am not learned. Wherefore the Lord said, for as much as this people draw near me with their mouth and with their lips to honor me, but have removed their heart far from me, and their fear toward me is taught by the precept of men. Therefore, behold, I will proceed to do a marvelous work among this people, even a marvelous work and a wonder. For the wisdom of their wise men shall perish, and the understanding of their prudent men shall be hid. For how long shall these things be? Revelation 12 told us 1,260 days. Revelation 12 also told us a time, times, and half a time. Revelation 13 told us 42 months. Daniel told us until that is determined shall be done. What does that mean? And is that for the same amount of time? Of course. Daniel 11:36, the king shall do according to his will. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, shall speak marvelous things against the God of God, shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished, for that is determined shall be done. Daniel 12:4-8. But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, there stood other two, the one on this side of the bank of the river, and the other on that side of the bank of the river. And one said to the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, how long shall it be to the end of these wonders? And I heard the man clothed in linen, which was upon the water of the river, and he held his right hand up. He held up his right hand and his left hand unto heaven, and sware by him that liveth forever and ever, that it shall be for a time, times, and a half. And when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished. And I heard, but I understood not. Then said I, O my Lord, what shall the end of these things? What shall be the end of these things? And he said, go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. In other words, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. And so Daniel's prophecy is being brought to an end. And what better way is there to end a prophecy than with the return of the king? Now, Daniel's prophecy doesn't directly state that the end of the 70th week, and along with it, the whole of the 70 weeks prophecy is brought to an end with the return of Christ. It says, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. Instead of referring to Jesus returning, Daniel's prophecy ends with the judgment of the guy who will be desolating the temple at the midpoint of the week. Fortunately, elsewhere in his book, Daniel tied that event to the return of the king. Remember in Daniel 11, Daniel told us the Antichrist would prosper from the midpoint of the week's abomination of desolation until the indignation be accomplished, and that is determined shall be done. In Daniel 12, he told us the same abomination of desolation would be a times and a half until he accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, that all these things shall be finished. Daniel gives us even more information about these things in Daniel 7, linking the beast to Revelation 13 in both appearance and substance regarding the abomination of desolation. Daniel says this, Daniel 7 through 11. After this, I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it. It was diverse from all the beasts that were before. It had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them a little horn, who before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were the eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. Abomination of desolation. I beheld until the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head like the pure wool. His throne was like a fiery flame, and his wheels as burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were opened. I beheld then, because of the voice of the great words which the horn spake, I beheld even till the beast was slain, and his body destroyed and given to the burning flame. And that would be what Daniel 9:27 references as even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. Revelation 19 also describes that event. However, I'm going to stop there. So that is what I wrote about the midst of the week, and that was actually the first part of chapter 10, the return of the king also. The abomination of desolation is a reactionary event, and it is a reaction to the preaching of the gospel worldwide, which happens at the 7th trumpet. And because the angel preaches the gospel worldwide and reveals this mystery that fear God and give glory to him and worship his son who created everything, the Antichrist is like, no, worship me instead. So he marches into the place where God would sit, into the holy place, declares himself to be above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he as God sits in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. And because Jesus foreknew that would happen, and because Daniel prophesied that it would happen, he's like, yeah, when you see that, leave. Because the worst time in human history is going to occur after that point, and if they don't leave, they're going to die. So it's reactionary. I thought that was interesting, so I thought I would share. If you guys have any questions, comments, or feedback, let me know. Otherwise, have a good rest of your weekend.